Northeast Utilities and Boston-based NSTAR have joined forces to create a $17.5 billion utility company. Rob Cox is a Connecticut native and a U.S. editor for Reuters who has written a series of articles examining the joining of the two power companies and now has reaction to their union. So I'm here with Rob Cox to talk about the fact that Massachusetts now gave its final approval to the NU-NSTAR merger. And I'm wondering whether you have thoughts. I mean, are you surprised that it got to this point now?
Well, I'm not surprised at all. I mean, I kind of knew in a sense that this is where these deals always end up. Mergers between utilities are difficult to do. When you look at the capital markets, you look around the United States, there's all sorts of constituencies and local politics play a role. So, you know, in a sense, I'm not entirely surprised. The issue is, of course, you know, this was an exceptional case. I mean, you know, as the people of Connecticut can attest, what happened with Hurricane Irene, or let's call it, you know, heavy storm Irene, really is what it was, and that freak snowstorm on Halloween weekend, you know, it really exposed huge problems and failings with our primary monopoly in the state. So you would have thought, in a sense, this one wasn't going to get away so easily. And so I'm actually not. I guess I'm not so surprised that ultimately Massachusetts and Connecticut are signing off on the deal. I'm surprised that the states, particularly Connecticut, didn't get a lot more, a bigger pound of flesh.
What would you have thought that they would have asked for?
Right. Well, I mean, let's think about it. You've got these two big providers that are going to merge. They're going to create an out-and-out monopoly. I mean, there's no question about it, right? So in exchange, I mean, you're going to lose a lot of accountability. The state of Connecticut now is basically, okay, there's a lot of talk about, well, you'll keep the headquarters here for 7 years, I think it is. Ultimately, though, the decisions are going to be made by a board of directors that is not based necessarily here, but in Massachusetts, has a much bigger constituency, broader concerns than we poor people in Connecticut. So I would have thought that you could get more than the concessions they got. So because there's some numbers. If you look at what they had proposed, $780 million of synergies or cost savings that will result from the deal over the course of 10 years. I mean, that's a good starting point for a number to choose from, right?
Yeah, 700 million, yeah.
And instead, well, I mean, you can go through it, and the main numbers they got $25 million in credits in Connecticut, and they got about 21 million in Massachusetts. Now, Connecticut got more than Massachusetts, right? So they can say, having actually started without any attempt to get any pounds of flesh, any concessions whatsoever, ultimately they made the decision to actually retroactively decide, actually we do have some jurisdiction here, and they did get money, and they got more because the governor was able to see, okay, Governor Devil Patrick in Massachusetts got 21. Well, darn it, we can get 25. But 25 million, when you think about it, out of 784 some odd million, it's not I mean, that's not a lot of money.
Right, and your greater, and maybe not a greater concern, but an additional concern of yours was you wanted to see if we could get greater accountability, right?
I mean, like, okay, so we're talking the numbers. Now, 784 million, that's the number. Okay, we can get 25 million. That's $16 per Connecticut resident. Remember that the Indians sold Manhattan for $24, so they got a better deal. But no, it's not necessarily equivalent. But you know, the real issue is, okay, so you get your $16 credit. I don't know, the average bill is probably something like $100 a month. So it's nothing. It's peanuts. What are you getting? Well, are you getting greater accountability? Are you getting? Are you sure that the next time a little bit of a snowstorm rolls through, or a big a Class 1 hurricane, whatever, are you sure that you're not going to lose power for a week? Now, we can lose power, of course, but not to be restored for a week. I mean, it was unconscionable. There is nothing in these concessions that is going to assure anyone that is the case, and that is the greater concern. I mean, Lori, when you have 4 years, or in Massachusetts, and 3 some odd years of rate caps, all of which coincide perfectly, I would argue, perhaps cynically, with the political designs of both the governor of Massachusetts and the governor of Connecticut. In the sense that you basically, the month after Governor Malloy is either gets a second term or not, so the December of, I think it's 14, that's actually when they can start to raise prices all of a sudden. You know, not necessarily. I mean, there is still a regulatory authority they have to go through, but they can start to raise fees. And it's the same thing in Massachusetts after Devil Patrick's second term.
Yeah, that's pretty cynical, though. Maybe.
Okay, I'm cynical, but but look, and I would put this to the governor, of course, and say, well, it looks pretty,
Right.
and I know that they would say, look, this is how things work, and but we all work with incentives. I mean, all of us, our behavior is essentially guided by the incentives we have, and I think in politics, your incentive is to get reelected, no doubt, and for companies, your incentive is to make money and to reward your shareholders, and I would say both sides on this one have been guided by their incentives quite nicely.
They did. The utility companies did pledge to make an investment in improvements in poles and tree maintenance and that kind of thing.
Yes.
But not sufficient, would you say?
Well, I mean, I'm not a tree and pole guy expert, but I would say, I mean, when you do look at a lot of the CapEx and things, and there's a $300 million program that's going to be part of this. Now, you're still going to pay for it. Customers are going to pay for that stuff. There's no question, and nobody said anything otherwise. You look at some of the things I pointed out early on when I took a look at this last year, was the cut in maintenance had been quite severe at Connecticut Light and Power, like 25% over 2 years. You're going to have to bring that up, and that will come down ultimately. It is going to come back to customers, but some of that will have to be borne, I would think, by shareholders, because you're going to reduce profit margins by some degree. But look, the next storm comes through, and we all sit there, wondering why we forgot to get our generators filled with diesel fuel, or even get a generator in my case. And then we say, where are those CL&P guys? What happened here? I thought this was all done because there was the big issue of 2011. I think it's going to happen. It's just like a financial crisis. We're going to have another banking crisis. You can bet we're going to have another utility crisis in the state of Connecticut.
So then will we be back asking them to make more adjustments, more investments in infrastructure?
We will, of course. The regulatory authorities will have that opportunity, but they will never have had an opportunity like they had now when you have two companies desperate to merge with executives highly compensated to make that merger happen. You had a moment here where you could really extract concessions, and even when there is no problem, like we had with the snowstorm and with Hurricane Irene, in other M&A deals, which I've covered, where you've seen utilities merge, often they don't get done anyway, and most of the time, local regulators ask for a whole lot of concessions, like they want to see rate cuts over this, that, they want to see this done, and what we got in Connecticut was probably equivalent to a normal deal negotiation. And this wasn't a normal situation. I think it's a lost opportunity in that respect.
Which is actually kind of surprising, because Governor Malloy is kind of an aggressive guy, and he usually casts a wide net to see what he can get. Yeah,
and I've pressured him in my own capacity, and I think he is a pretty good guy, and actually does know that this is a political issue as much, and it really almost became. I mean, you saw when he was up there standing up with the CEO of Connecticut Light and Power. I mean, that was not good for his approval ratings. He got the sense that and started to walk away from those briefings, which you guys were covering. Look, I think this is the fact that the Connecticut regulators didn't actually ask for some sort of concessions from the first point tells you that they're not a very strong regulatory body. Let's face it. If they had been really uber regulators, they would have jumped in from the get-go, because they know you could look around every state in America does this when utilities merge. They get something for their consumers. It's really strange that they didn't ask for it in the first place. They did rectify it in the end, but it took a lot of pressure and a lot of people without lights and spoiled meats in their refrigerators to make it happen.
So the next step should be perhaps to put some teeth into that regulation.
I mean, you have to look at I think it's the PURA, right? I mean, you have to look at that regulatory body. Regulators, I should say the state, legislators, they need to look at really carefully at whether or not they've got a body that is actually doing what it's supposed to be doing, which is keeping CL&P, and there are, of course, other regulators in this, or utilities in the state, but really keeping on our toes, just in the same way we do. Again, I use the analogy of the banking crisis. Let's make sure the Fed, make sure all these guys are focused on making sure the banks aren't too big to fail, aren't doing stupid things. Regulate, use your regulatory authority with the way it was intended. And I'm afraid that wasn't what was happening before. Now we have an opportunity to make sure that does happen.
All right. So a lost opportunity, but we'll get our $16 and
$16. That's like I don't know. It's almost a case of beer, or a lot of peanut butter and jelly.
Right. Well, we appreciate you holding them to task throughout this whole thing. Thanks a lot,
Thank you
Rob.
very much.
Don't forget, if you missed something on The Real Story, you can now watch it online by going to ctnow.com. You can also catch us on YouTube. Thanks for watching this week's edition of The Real Story. We'll see you here again next week.